I can't be the only one who sometimes, or at least used to find, that I would constantly mix up Generation 2 and Generation 3 Pokemon, or even just from the first 3 generations. And I think this is mostly due to 2 things. At least for most people, because I know that this is something that other people have as well. And I think it really comes down to the 2 things that are, in Generation 2, a lot of the Pokemon actually were locked away in Kanto, so a lot of people never really properly experienced them. And then in Generation 3, they would be a lot more common. Or the second thing could actually just be that the first 3 generations are sort of a bit locked away. I mean, technically you could buy the first 2 generations on the 3DS, but you know, someone may have not played the first 3 generations, aka me. So, for example, my experience with Poland is basically just in ORAS, which, by the way, I love that game. So I sort of just wanted to go over a list of many Pokemon that I sort of just mix up because of the situation where as a Pokemon fan, as a really big Pokemon fan, I can't even say Pokemon apparently, and now as a YouTuber of a Poketuber, I think they call them, now as a Poketuber, I haven't played the first 3 generations, and I really want to. Generation 3 looks like it's a lot of fun, but at the moment it's not really available. But either way, let's just go through some Pokemon that I constantly mix up. So the first one would be the Lediba line, so Lediba and Ledian. For some reason, I always associated them with more like Generation 6, I think, and I think that's because they show up pretty early in that game quite a bit, so I think that's why I associated Lediba and Ledian with Generation 6, even though they have these awesome Generation 5 sprites. Now, Lantern and Chinchou, wow, you're telling me they were from Generation 2? I totally thought they were from Generation 3. So you see, finding out things as we go through this video. And I've always thought of Cleffa as a baby Pokemon, more to be like in Generation 1, but yeah, baby Pokemon got introduced in Generation 2, so that makes sense as well. So when I first think of the Marie, Flaffy, Ampharos line, I first think of Generation 5 and that ranch, because that's basically where they show up the most. So, we then have Sudowoodo, which for some reason I associate more with Generation 3 or 4 even, maybe 4 a bit. Which is interesting because technically that's where Bonsai comes from. So I guess that's why I have an association with it later on. Apom. Okay, Apom I always thought was like Generation 3. Like, now I know Generation 2, but I always associated Apom with Generation 3. Now I'm actually finding out something. Quagsire is from Generation 2. I thought it was from Generation 4. I figured it was like a added evolution for some reason. So you see, we're still very early in, yet there's a ton of Pokemon that I associate with different generations. Here's an interesting one, Misdreavus. I totally associate Misdreavus from Generation 4 because its evolution, Mismagius, pretty sure it's from Generation 4, so I guess that's why. So we can see a trend so far that a lot of the Pokemon that I associate with different generations are mostly because they are more common in that game, in like a different game than where they were introduced in, or they got an evolution later on. Forretress is from Generation 2 apparently. I thought it was from Generation 3. So you see, still learning some new things every once in a while. I guess the reason why I thought it was from Generation 3 is because Brock used it in the anime, in the Hoenn anime, so. And so do I associate Shuckle with Generation 3. Sneasel, I always associated with Generation 4. Even though it appeared in like the Hoenn anime movie as well, but a different one with the like spy. Was that its evolution? I forgot exactly, but it was that line. So yeah, I associate like Sneasel with more so Generation 3, 4. And next we have a Pokemon that I think is pretty common for people to mix up, and that's the Magcargo line. I think a lot of other people also associate Magcargo with the later like Generation 3. That's pretty interesting. And then we have Swinub and Piloswine, who I always thought was from Generation 4. I'm actually shocked that they're from Generation 2. Excuse me, what? They're from Generation 2? Wow. Yeah, I guess Mamoswine got introduced in Generation 4, so, you know, again, you sort of just mix up from what generation they were brought in because of the later evolutions. And the one who's shooting Delibirds down is Octillery, who I always associated with Generation 3. Not really sure why. I feel like it just has that design type of, like, it looks like it's from Generation 3 to me. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. And now I think we are getting to the most infamous one, and that is Skarmory. Skarmory, I refuse to believe that it was introduced in Generation 2. I just refuse to believe it, and none of you are going to change my mind, and I'm just going to continue because I genuinely refuse to believe it. And then we have the Houndoom line. Now, I don't know what generation I associate it with, but it definitely wasn't like Generation 2. At least Houndoom. Maybe Houndour I have associated with Generation 2, not Houndoom. I feel like it shows up a lot more often in later games. Now, I don't know about other people, but personally for me, Phanpy and Donphan are like, for me, Generation 3. I, again, refuse to believe that they're from any other generation. I think Donphan got its own episode in the Hoenn anime, and Phanpy also was in that episode, and it sort of just stuck with Ash for a little bit after he beat the League, I think, if I'm not mistaken, so that's probably why. We then also have Smeargle, who I associated, I don't really know, maybe Generation 4. I think it's Generation 4 that I really associated Smeargle with. Probably because of the Painter class, maybe. And last but not least, the most legendary Pokemon of them all, Magby. Yeah, I just associate Magby with the later generations, like Generation 4, mostly because, like, I guess, you know, its entire line is sort of just split up between Generation 1, Generation 4, all of that, so there's that. Now, I know this is a weird order, but let's actually go to Generation 1 Pokemon, because here are just Pokemon that I guess I personally associate with different generations. Ekans. Now, this is a very interesting one, because Jesse used Ekans in the anime. In the Kanto anime, I'm pretty sure, right? And I grew up with the anime, so this should definitely be something I associate with Generation 1. But for some reason I associate it with Generation 2. Maybe, like, there's something about its simplicity that makes me feel like it's, I don't really know. I feel like a lot of the other Pokemon are perhaps a bit more spiky? Maybe that's it? I don't know. Wigglytuff. I feel like maybe just because Jigglypuff is too iconic for Generation 1 that I guess I just associated Wigglytuff with a later generation. I feel like Wigglytuff is more like Generation 4, even though it doesn't really appear in Generation 4. And same goes for the Doduo line. I, for some reason, associate, like, Doduo from Generation 2. Then we have Lickitung, which I also associate more with Generation 2. Okay, that's about it. So for Generation 1, I think it's mostly because Generation 1 has a ton of iconic Pokemon, so I feel like a lot of them just overshadow a lot of others. So once those Pokemon are like super obscure in terms of Generation 1, I feel like I sort of just associate them with the next Generation 2, because I feel like Generation 2 is the most forgotten probably. I think this is pretty common amongst other Pokemon fans that I noticed, that when it comes to Generation 2 Pokemon, it seems like a lot of people just don't really care too much about them. Like, you don't really hear them mentioned often. At least, that's how it seems to me. And you know, let's do a quick sweep of Generation 3 anyways, because we may as well, right? After Generation 3, I think I have a pretty good association with Pokemon, so I'm not really gonna bother finding, like, maybe one or two that I miss. Or maybe there's none at all. I'm not sure. But the first I would say is Linoon, Linoon? I think it's Linoon, right? Linoon, yeah, because it's like a line. Yeah, it has to be Linoon. The funny part about Linoon is that it's an evolution of Zigzagoon. But for some reason I associate Linoon with Generation 2, which makes no sense, right? But, like, I don't really think of Zigzagoon and Linoon as an evolution. That's a funny part, I feel. Surskit and Masquerain, I feel like, at least for me, they feel more like Generation 2 Pokemon. And I feel like, I don't really know, Masquerain, I feel is pretty forgettable for me. As a Pokemon in general, I really like Surskit. But Masquerain, I guess I just, at least don't associate them as an evolution line. Like, I don't really think of Surskit and then imagine Masquerain like I would if I imagined Wingull and then Pelipper, you know? And Cotton Ninja, Ninja, I associate them with more like Generation 2s. Same with Azurill. And for Sableye, I feel it's more like a Generation 4 Pokemon. Same with Meditite and Medicham. Volbeat and Illumeyes also feel like Generation 2 Pokemon a bit for me. And so does Gulpin and Swalot. Even Grumpig and Spoing, and Wynaut for Generation 2. Spheal I also associate more with Generation 2, interestingly enough. And that's about it. So somehow I made a super long video just discussing what Pokemon I associate with the wrong generation, and basically just made a fool out of myself as a Pokemon fan. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what Pokemon you may mix up. Perhaps you've played Pokemon since the very beginning, so like you genuinely remember like each reveal, and so they're ingrained to you which generation they come from. So please let me know how that has gone for you, what you think of all the Pokemon that I mix up, because I'm curious as to what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye!